Floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. My name is Sean Dugan. I'm a recovered cocaine addict.
Hey,
Hey,
Sean.
Sean.
Um, Thanks, Nick, for asking. And it's always an honor and privilege to speak at a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. It's an honor and privilege to speak at any meeting, but especially at Cocaine Anonymous. Cocaine Anonymous is my home slash primary slash main fellowship. This is I walked into my first Cocaine Anonymous meeting in the fall of 1987. I didn't get sober from that first time, but I'm sober 34 years, 2 months, and 1 day. February 1st, 1991 is my sobriety date. And getting sober in CA was absolutely the best thing that ever happened in my life. Um, it's funny, I invited a few friends to come on today, and so many of them are like, oh, yeah, I'll be there. But only one is. Susan is the only one here, and it's fine. I understand people have other things going on in their life. They forget, they got kids or jobs or whatever. And one of the difficult but great things about Zoom, it's 7:30 at night for you. I invited friends who are in the UK, so it's 6:30 for them. Susan and I are in New York, so it's 1:30 in the afternoon. I invited friends on the West Coast in Los Angeles, so it's whatever. There's different time zones. So my feelings are not hurt. Oh, my sponsee James just logged on from Atlanta. Uh, so my feelings are not hurt when somebody doesn't show up, especially for a Zoom meeting. It's funny, Nick asked me yesterday. I was in London. I was in London this weekend for the convention, and my life is that I am all over the world. You never know where I am from day to day. If you want to have an idea where I am, check my Facebook posts. I'll, kind of check in from wherever I am. But I was in London last week and over the weekend for the convention, had a great time. I stayed an extra day, so I flew home yesterday, and Nick reached out and says, "Oh, do you have a recording?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I do." So I sent him one from a CA convention I spoke at last March, and he said the quality wasn't that good. Can you find something else? So I'm looking, for from another CA convention, and he goes, "Oh, we found one." So the recording of me that's posted on the video was from an AA meeting in 2008 when I was still living in Los Angeles, and that was 17 years ago. And I listened to, just that short bit of it, and I was like, oh yeah, I sounded pretty good back then. But it was 17 years ago, so I'm 34 years sober, so that was half of my sobriety. That was I think March or May of 2008. So it's exactly 17 years ago. So half of my sobriety. Um, and I think basically, I'm the same guy. Obviously I have grown, I have different views, but Nick asked me to share on love and service, and that's the main thing. That's the main thing of Cocaine Anonymous and the other 12 step fellowships is love and service, and how to be of service. Welcome to anybody who's new to Cocaine Anonymous. Welcome to Jeanette up there in Germany. You know, um, it's a beautiful thing to see somebody on a CA meeting who doesn't have CA meetings in the area. One of the beautiful things about Zoom, and again, I prefer in-person meetings. I would always much rather go to an in-person meeting, but Zoom has just opened up literally the world to recovery. There are people who can't get to a face-to-face meeting, or they've never tried this fellowship because of where they live. But through the Zoom, we're able to, shared meetings, go to meetings in different parts of the world, and it's a beautiful thing. I know that again, there's people who hate it and say, "Oh, it's time for shut down these Zoom meetings." I was like, no, Zoom meetings are never going away. They're never going away. If you prefer to go to an in-person meeting, that's great, but Zoom meetings are never going away. Um, I will share in a general way what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. Um, Hopefully, share a message of depth and weight and what Cocaine Anonymous has done for me. I'm from Los Angeles. It's whenever somebody asks me where I'm from, I always have to say I'm from Los Angeles, but I live in New York City. And I didn't come from a troubled childhood. I was not abused or beaten or anything like that. My parents were loving and supportive. So that's not why I'm an addict. It's not, I hear different people's stories. They say, oh, I knew I wasn't going to be an alcoholic addict because my mom was, or my dad was, or, my mom, my dad, used to beat up my mom and I'm not going to be like it. That's not my story. I had a very loving, supportive household. But still, that didn't set me apart, or I still did not feel a part of. Even though my parents were loving and supportive, my folks were married for 51 years. Hey, Ellen, in Kansas City. Um, the fact that we didn't have a dysfunctional household, that kind of set me apart from other kids. The fact that my parents were a lot older when I was born. My mom was 39 when I was born, and my dad was 46. I have a sister. She's my half sister. She's 17 years older than I am. So just a lot of different things. I'm the only boy in the family. I have girl cousins and different things, made me feel different, but I was not planning on doing drugs or alcohol. My dad didn't drink really. He drank occasionally. And I remember one day he drank cognac. And one day I, wanted to see what the cognac tasted like. So he gave me a sip and I didn't like it. It burned and I couldn't understand why anybody would want to drink cognac. And some point later, he was having a beer. He would have beers with dinner every day. He would buy these little mini kegs. And one day I wanted to taste the beer and I tasted it, didn't like it. It was bitter, didn't like it at all, didn't understand why anybody would want to drink. And the first time I had any alcohol that I enjoyed was the first time I had communion at church. And that wine mixed with the water, it tasted good. And I think I was 8 years old. And at 8, I decided I was going to drink. I was going to drink wine. The big book, the doctor's opinion, the big book says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. What drinking wine that day and going forward did for me, it helped me fit in. The effect was I felt like I fit in. Going forward, I got to sit at the adult table at Christmas and Thanksgiving, different holiday functions, and I didn't have to sit at the kids' table anymore. So at 8, 9, 10 years old, what drinking alcohol did for me, it gave me the effect of fitting in. Not the same effect that it would give me later, or cocaine. A lot of people, alcohol gives them, liquid courage, as we call it here. Helps you overcome your shyness or nervousness. Normal people drink when they have a hard day at work. They get home from work and they have a glass of wine or a beer or something like that, and it helps them. And what it did for me is just help me feel like I fit in. But I knew I wasn't going to do anything hard. I promised myself I was not going to smoke weed. I wasn't, going to do anything harder. And I stuck to that, for the rest of primary school. Um, when I got out of high school, which I guess is secondary school, um, I found out a good friend of mine had been smoking weed for a while. So I said, oh, let me try weed. So I started smoking weed and I liked it. And it was progressive. It was something that I did occasionally, once in a while on the weekends, and it was fine. It didn't affect. So I said, oh, it's okay. It's not as bad. Smoking weed is not as bad. Um, but again, I promised myself I wasn't going to do it, but now I was doing it. So it progressed from something that I did once in a while on the weekend to something I did every weekend. And then the weekends started getting longer. Then the weekends would start on Saturday or start on Thursday night and, run through Monday. So I'm smoking from Thursday through Monday. And then I was like, oh, as long as I don't smoke it during the week, I'm all right. And then one day somebody said, you want to smoke on a Wednesday? And I said, yeah, okay, cool. So I started smoking on a Wednesday. Then said, well, as long as I don't, smoke in the morning, I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with smoking every day as long as you don't do it in the morning. And then one day somebody, said, you want to smoke before school? And I was like, yeah, okay. Again, the doctor's opinion says the alcoholic addict cannot differentiate the true from the false. what I had told myself growing up was that I was never going to smoke weed. I was never going to do anything, any drugs. And now I'm rationalizing that it's okay to do it. And I'm setting boundaries, but I'm crossing those boundaries and changing the boundaries. And then it's like, okay, it's cool, whatever. It's a plant. It grows natural. God put it here for a reason, so it must be okay to smoke weed. So now I'm in college, I'm drinking, I'm smoking weed whenever, and I didn't really have any consequences. So I just felt it's okay. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to do anything else. That's all I'm going to do. And I got out of college. I was working in the TV industry, TV sports industry. Did not have any consequences. But then one day, about 40 years ago, somebody said, you want to try some cocaine? And I said, okay. Because in the mid 80s, cocaine was, they thought, non-addictive. It was the drug of the Hollywood elite. Doctors did it, lawyers did it, more and more people were doing it. And if you drank and did coke, you were more popular. And I wanted to be popular. So I started snorting cocaine. Um, and I snorted cocaine successfully for about a year, year and a half. Again, the consequences didn't kick in. Um, again, I was working in the TV sports industry. Most people on the shoots that we were doing did coke. We all smoked weed. We got to drink for free, and it was, it was the mid 80s. Mid 80s. I was in my 20s. It was popular. Again, it was all good. There were no consequences. The first time I tried to stop doing cocaine was 1985. My folks helped me buy a condominium, and I figured since I was a homeowner, I should be more responsible with my money. So I shouldn't do cocaine anymore. So I made a plan to stop doing cocaine on Saturday. And I was going to have a housewarming party, and I was going to do enough cocaine to get out of my system, and that was going to be it. And that was the plan. It was the middle of July 1985, and Saturday is going to be the last time I do cocaine. And of course, I went past Saturday, because the party lasted past midnight. So then it was technically Sunday. And I said, well, I know I said Saturday, but I meant the weekend. And since I didn't have to go to work on Monday, the weekend is if you don't have to go to work. So I'm doing it on Monday. And then I'm doing lines on Tuesday and Wednesday. And I said, well, you know what? I'll quit at the end of the month. And then at the end of the month came and went. And I said, I'll quit next month. And I just kept moving the dates back. And probably November of 1985, I said, you know what? I'm gonna do it for the rest of the year, but I'm gonna quit for New Year's resolution. That'll be it. New Year's 1986, I'm never gonna do cocaine anymore. And I'm still doing lines on January 2nd and 3rd. Again, could not differentiate the true from the false. I promised myself that I'm never going to do smoke weed. I'm smoking weed. Promised myself I'm never going to snort cocaine. I'm snorting cocaine. Promised myself I'm going to stop snorting cocaine on January 1st, and I'm still snorting cocaine January 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And I said, as long as I don't smoke cocaine, I'll be all right. And the mid 80s is when crack slash freebase slash rock, whatever you want to call it, was starting to pick up. And a friend of mine offered me a hit off the crack pipe. And I said, okay, I'll try it. Again, because everything else, there was no consequences. I hadn't lost a job. I hadn't, bounced checks. I hadn't done anything. It was when I was just snorting coke, smoking weed, and drinking, my life kept moving forward. But when I started smoking cocaine, the wheels came off in a very short period of time. In a very short period of time, I lost that job in the TV industry, the job that I wanted so badly. In a very short period of time, I started having money problems. In a very short period of time, I started lying to the people who loved me and cared about me. Totally different than the person I am today, than the person I was growing up. Growing up, again, I had lots of friends. I was popular. I did things, went to summer camp, went to school, had lots of friends. I was honest. But when I started smoking cocaine, all of that changed. And again, I lost a job in the TV industry, and I figured I had a problem with cocaine. And somebody who knew me from work said, you had a problem? And she gave me the number of Cocaine Anonymous. And the first time I called CA was in February or March of 1986. 87. And there was two places I called. They gave me the name of a place called Natural High, and it was a clubhouse that had all 12-step fellowship meetings, and they gave me number CA. And I called Natural High first, and I was nervous and scared. And the person answered, and I said, well, what is it? You know, and what I heard him say might not be what he actually said, but what I heard him say was, it's a religious program. And I didn't want to have anything to do with God at that point. He probably said it's a spiritual program. He might have said it was a spiritual program, but I heard it's a religious program. And I was like, nope, that's not for me. So then when I hung up and I called Cocaine Anonymous, and the person that answered the phone and same question, what is it? And the answer made sense to me. He said, we're a bunch of people who used to do cocaine. We don't do cocaine anymore, and we help other people not to do cocaine. And that sounded like someplace that would be okay. I could go there. Now, I didn't go to a meeting for at least 6 months. I wasn't really ready to stop, but that seed was planted. I walked into my first meeting in Beverly Hills, California. There was beautiful people there, and I heard about the steps, and I heard about sponsorship, and I heard about all that. But again, I wasn't ready to quit yet. So I was in the rooms for a couple weeks in 1987. There's still people that I know in my life today who I met at that first meeting, but I wasn't ready yet. And since I wasn't ready, I didn't get sober. So I stopped going to meetings, and I was, out working at a gym, doing other things. I started going back to CA in the fall of 1989, and I went pretty much every day. I was doing 90 meetings in 90 days. I had a sponsor. I was going to Cocaine Anonymous events, but I wasn't being honest. I was using in between meetings. So I took a 30-day chip and had gotten high the day before. Took a 60-day chip, later and gotten high the day before. Took a 90-day chip, and been getting high the whole time. And I don't know if people knew, but they never said they knew. Nobody ever called me on it. Nobody ever said, hey, that chip, you're not really sober. Because most of the time, if I showed up for a meeting, I was sober that day. But I was using in between, and nobody ever called me out on it. So if there's anybody in the meeting today who's not as sober as you're telling people you are, you're still welcome here. Love and service. We don't care. You're still welcome, Cocaine Anonymous. My friend Susan and I, we have a mutual friend, and some of her friends or other friends are worried about her. We think she might be using. And it's like, okay, maybe she is, but let's just still keep the door open for her, and keep that loving conversation going. So again, so it's the fall of 1989. I'm going to meetings and not staying sober. I went to rehab early in 2000 and went to 30 days of rehab. And when I left, my counselor thought I was going to be great. He told me, oh, Sean, you're going to be great. And I literally left the rehab and went back to the crack house because I want to tell him how great being sober was. You know, 30 days of treatment. And we read in Who's a Cocaine Addict, we thought we can get the old high again using half as much. And that's exactly what I thought because I was clean and sober for the first time for 30 days. I was 30 days sober. Of course I can get high on just a little bit. And it doesn't work that way. So, I sat in that crack house and they offered me to hit off the pipe. I'm like, no, no, I'm good. I'm good. You sure you don't want to hit? No, I'm good. And that third time they offered me, that's when I was like, yeah, I could probably do this. And that started another run. I was out for about another 6 weeks. And then I went back into rehab. I had a sobriety date of April 30th, 1990. And I said, let me give this thing, give it a shot. And I was really sober for the rest of 1990. And I went to CA World Service Convention that was in Phoenix, where it's going to be this year. If you get a chance to go to the CA World Service Convention, go. It's going to be Phoenix next month. So I went to the convention. I saw hundreds of people who were all sober. And you guys really make sobriety look attractive. And there were beautiful women and handsome men, and we were dancing and having big meetings. And my friend Ken Cross, and somebody who's now my friend Ken Cross, was the main speaker Saturday night. And I was like, okay, yeah, 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 this is great. I can try the sobriety thing out. So I was living in a sober living. At the banquet, when they had the countdown, I was the only person in the room with 28 days. And it was the seed not only had planted, it started to take roots and it was growing. And I said, yeah, I'm going to do the sobriety thing for a year. I still hadn't committed. I still did not believe that I was truly a drug addict. I thought I was the problem user. The big book talks about the heavy user and the problem user. The problem user, given sufficient reason, given a reason to stop, they're going to stop. The addict, the alcoholic like me, I can't stop. So I was able to not use for the rest of 1990. And my plan was stay sober for a year and then I would prove to you and to myself that I wasn't really a drug addict and I was going to use occasionally. Well, I got to 8 months sober and decided that that was close enough to a year. So I patted myself on the back, left the sober living, and I was going to get high just one night. And I went to buy some crack rocks, and that one night turned into about a month of nonstop using. And that was proof enough to me that I couldn't stop, that I was truly a drug addict. I got arrested again, January 31st, 1991, and I woke up February 1st, and I've been sober ever since. And at some point, and so I was in jail, I spent 2 months in jail. At some point over those 2 months in jail, the obsession to use was removed. I don't know exactly when it happened. I said I got arrested January 31st. If I'd gotten out February 1st, I would have got high. If I got out February 2nd, I would have got high. If I got out February 3rd, I probably would have got high. At some point in that first week or second week of February 1991, I decided that I'd rather stay sober. It was more important for me to stay sober than try it. Because the great obsession of every addict alcoholic is that somehow, some way, we're going to do this like we used to be able to do it. I keep remembering how when I could leave some cocaine, just do a little bit and then leave some for tomorrow or for next week. You could leave the party. Those days were long gone. So I was given the gift of desperation. I decided that I'd rather stay sober. And when I got out of jail, I moved back into sober living, and that's when this sobriety actually started. And I was doing the 90-90. I was going to the gym, and I was building a life back for myself. When I was about 90 days sober, so in June of 1991, I was at a meeting and there was an announcement that the CA World Service Office was looking for a shipping clerk. And I knew the manager at the office. At the time, the office was in Los Angeles, so in Culver City. That's where I was living in sober living. The office has now moved to Arizona, but uh, it was in Culver City. So I got a job working at the CA office. And the eighth tradition says Cocaine Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers will have special workers. And I became a special worker. At the time, Cocaine Anonymous was just in North America. It was, the United States and a few meetings in Canada. So when you need the chips, there's CA fellowshipping or there's CA memorabilia at your meeting. There's registration forms for conventions. There's flyers. There's pamphlets. There's chips. There's banners. There's the steps. All that was shipped out from one office in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, and I was the guy that did that. So I got to ship out meeting materials all over the country. In January of 1992, just before I turned a year sober, a guy named Alan came into the office and he said, we had the first meeting of Cocaine Anonymous last night in London, and they wanted me to pick up some stuff. So I was able to give the first chips, literature, all the CA memorabilia that came back over to the UK were sent by me. People think that they kind of get a twist. They're like, oh, you were being of service. You said, no, it was my job. I was an eighth tradition worker. It was my job. But yes, the first literature, the first chips, the first, CA banners that went to the UK were shipped by me. in January of 1992. And from there, so the first meetings outside of North America were in London. And then they grew, more meetings in London. And now there are two regions in Europe. There's the UK or the European region, which just had the convention this past weekend, and there's also mainland Europe. Cocaine Anonymous has grown. Cocaine Anonymous keeps growing. Soon we're going to have meetings in Jeanette City because she's going to start a Cocaine Anonymous meeting the same way it was started in Frankfurt, the same way things were started in Amsterdam, the same way meetings were started in Denmark. Cocaine Anonymous is a worldwide fellowship that is growing and growing and growing. And I had a small part in getting those chips and literature to the first meetings in the UK in 1992, and for that I'm ever grateful. Um, so I turned a year sober in January of 92, and then, the things got better. Things continue to get better. Um, my life got bigger, my life got better. And then when I was almost 10 years sober, I'd stopped working on my program. I wasn't going to as many meetings because my life was good. I was working at a gym, I was managing the gym, I had this girlfriend, I had a nice big car, things were great. Now I'm not going to use again. And I stopped feeding my spirituality. I stopped feeding my soul. And in a very short period of time, I lost everything, lost a job, lost a girlfriend, and I really thought about using again. So this was at 9 years and 11 months sober. I almost thought about using, and it was different. It wasn't the old, oh, it'll be great this time. I'm going to lose everything. But since I didn't have a job or relationship, and I didn't really think I had anything to lose, and instead of picking up, I worked the steps again. And I worked the steps with somebody who turned me on to the set aside prayer. And if you don't know, the set aside prayer in a nutshell is God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about you, the steps, the program, so that I might be open to having a new experience. And I worked the steps again. When I finished with that workshop, that was a workshop to get you through the 12 steps in a month. After that, I got into a longer workshops with my sponsor. We went through the big book page by page, line by line, and that took about a year and a half. And that was a workshop. When we started, there were about 25 people, and when we ended a year and a half later, there were just 10 of us. So those two things, working the steps quickly, um, in the month, and then the long big book study, page by page, line by line, changed my life. And that was, 24 years ago. And what I've been given is the opportunity to stay sober one day at a time and to pass that on to other people. Love and service. There is nothing that Cocaine Anonymous could ask me that would be too much. I jokingly, when I turned 32 years sober, so about 2 years ago. I live in New York now. I moved to New York about 10 years ago. And since I got sober in LA, we call them birthdays. And in New York, they call them anniversaries. But when I was 32 years sober, and when I celebrate, I put $1 for every year. So at my AA fellowship, my AA home group, I put $32 in the basket. My CA home group, I put $32 in the basket. When I went to California that same month, I did the same thing. And I was at one meeting and I said, wow, this is getting expensive putting all this money in the basket. But it's so much cheaper than a night out of getting loaded. And then I said, you know what? There's nothing Cocaine Anonymous could ask me to do that would be too much. And about a week later, I got a call from Holland, and somebody says, "Oh, we want you to speak at our convention." And I said, "Oh yeah, great. Yeah, be honored. Thank you." And they're like, "But we're a very small fellowship, so we're asking people who can pay for their own airfare." And I said, "You know what? A week ago, I said there's nothing Cocaine Anonymous could ask me that'd be too much. So yes, I'll come speak to your convention and pay my own airfare." So I just have to be careful what I put out in the universe because sometimes God will call me on and say, "Yeah, you said there's nothing too much. Great. How about this?" But that convention was one of the best conventions I ever went to, and it introduced me to people uh, in CA in the UK or in Holland, and then I got to go to the World Convention last year. And people have asked me, I've been to over 90 Cocaine Anonymous conventions. Since the first one I went to in 1990, all the world conventions, I've only missed one. And the world convention you guys put on last year was definitely one of the top two, top three. It was awesome. And you made a lot of money for Cocaine Anonymous is great, but the fellowship, the love that I got was just beyond compare. So whenever there's a Cocaine Anonymous convention, if I get a chance to go, I'm going. Um, the life I live now, it is literally beyond my wildest dreams. As I said, my friend Susan and I, we both work in the treatment industry. So my job, what I do for a living, is help people get and stay sober. What I do for fun is help people get and stay sober. So, my vocation and my avocation. I sponsor four guys right now. None of them came in through CA. You know, James, Jamel, um, Ken. None of my sponsees came in through CA, but they all have a CA sponsor. That tape, that recording that Nick used of me again was an AA speaker meeting. And for me, CA and AA are almost, the same. The message is the same, but for me, Cocaine Anonymous is truly my home because I needed to hear about cocaine addiction. And I know that in Europe and other parts of the world, a lot of people go to one or the other just because where I live, there's only four in-person CA meetings a week in Manhattan, and that's just the way it is. So I go to primarily AA here, or half and half. But when I was in London last week, I landed Tuesday morning, went to CA meeting Tuesday night, went to CA meeting Wednesday night, went to CA meeting Thursday night, and then went to the CA convention. I've been to over 90 Cocaine Anonymous conventions. I've been to one AA convention. I've been a delegate. I've been a GSR. I've, chaired meetings. Cocaine Anonymous is my home fellowship. There is nothing that this fellowship can ask of me that would ever be too much. Um, Again, I've been given a life beyond my wildest dreams. It was funny. Again, at my first CA convention in 1990, when they were doing the countdown, there was a few people with less time than me, but I was the only person in the room with 28 days. So when I stood up, I felt like everybody was applauding for me. At the convention this past weekend, at 34 years, I was the person with the most amount of time. So it's full circle from the newest newcomer to the person with the most amount of time. And I just hope to keep being able to go to Cocaine Anonymous conventions, Cocaine Anonymous meetings, help watch this thing grow. Jeanette, if you need some help starting a CA meeting in Germany, just let me know. I'll be there to do whatever I can. I'm planning on going back to the UK in June. I got a work event, but of course, I'm gonna do some CA meetings. Um, Cocaine Anonymous is my life. It gave me a life and it continues to give me a life. My name is Sean. I'm a recovered cocaine addict. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you so much.